welcome to the OnPar Podcast here from the beautiful old Florida golf course in Naples, Florida. And today, here I am, Drew D'Alberto, your host, with Sean Kicker, the coach.
Hey, Drew.
And
Excited to be here. This is the first real mobile podcast that we've done so far.
I'm looking forward to it as well. And we've got our most honored guest, Darren, who is the head superintendent here from inception. So thanks for being with us today and taking the time.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely our pleasure. So, Darren, you've been here from the beginning, Tom told us. So how important was that as far as when the golf course was being designed and built, and how involved were you in that process?
Yeah, so extremely important. I firmly believe that if a golf course is under construction, a golf course superintendent should be in place, should be on site. Reese Jones, tremendous golf course architect, the Open Doctor, designed Old Florida Golf Club, dear friend, and certainly as a superintendent, I would not want to influence his design. This is his, not mine. But as a golf course superintendent, being on site, I was able to work with Reese and in tandem and his staff to talk about different agronomy issues. Where the sun will be at certain times of year, or traffic patterns where people need to come off an area. So those kind of things are what I was involved with from day one. So it was a great experience, and it's been a privilege to be here 31 years.
31 years. So you were ridiculously young at the time that you started this. So how did you get in with this in your early 20s, I'm guessing?
I tell people, most people 12 years old, but
yeah, well,
you're correct.
I didn't want to flatter you too much. Golfers already have enough of an ego, right? So.
Right. So I was 24 when I started,
Wow.
And I was working at the Loxahatchee Club as an assistant superintendent, and was very fortunate when they did a job search to come up on two people's list. So our club president of 30 years, Mr. Tom Cook, had asked one of his dear friends, Frank Doby at the Sharon Club in Akron, Ohio, where can I find a good young man or a good person to be a golf course superintendent? So I ended up on Frank's list, and then also the USGA agronomist list. So I came over and interviewed, and they took a chance on this young 24-year-old, and
obviously
hopefully it paid off.
I
hope so.
Right? Very cool.
Well, it's interesting that you at such a young age, like you obviously had a pedigree of grooming with the people that you work for. You were very fortunate in that. Talk a little bit about how much you've learned since, how much you thought you knew, and how much you really learned since then.
So I was a graduate of Penn State University, the agronomy program, and I have lots of Dr. Dewich stories. Dr. Dewich was one of my earliest mentors. Dr. Dewich is the plant breeder that developed pin cross and pin links and any pin variety is Dr. Dewich. So he's since passed, but Dr. Dewich in school, I remember him saying, the day you stop learning is the day you die.
Yeah.
I could not agree more. I continually try to learn both on the course, off the course, listen to podcast, educational sessions, anything I can do. So I want to be better personally and professionally every day I live, and that's been my goal since day one here in my life, certainly at Old Florida.
Yeah, it's a great philosophy. I have the same thing with my career with the PGA. Is you would think that when you think you've learned it all, there's something else that comes along, and
always.
I didn't realize we're fellow Penn Staters, by the way.
Awesome.
I my degree in biomechanics from them.
We're all Big Ten guys. I went to IU, so we're all Big Ten. So, what is your biggest success over the past 30 plus years that you've been here, and what are you most proud of on this golf course specifically?
Reese Jones likes to use the phrase, "We've stood the test of time at Old Florida," and we really have. I mean, what you'll see today on the golf course is essentially what we constructed in 1992. A few subtle changes here and there. So certainly proud of what we have at Old Florida. We have a waiting list to get in. We've been very successful. To be employed that long here in a challenging industry, yeah. I'd have to say that's a success. Keeping members happy, and I think a large part of that is communication skills, and not just healthy turf grass. And another short Dr. Dewich story is that the first day of school, he drew a circle on the board and he drew a little triangle on the bottom, and He wrote the word turf in that little triangle, which was about 10% of the circle. On the larger part of the circle, he wrote the word people.
Yeah.
That was the very first day. And what he said was, the next 2 years, we can teach you 10% of what you need to do your job.
Yeah.
90% is people. Either you have those skills inherently or you better learn them.
Right.
And of course, you can always improve on them, going on your theme of always being able to learn and get better.
Absolutely, every day.
I always
translate to the sport of golf very well, I'm told.
sometimes being a golf course superintendent is a lot like being a head football coach in the NFL or a head basketball coach in the NBA. Is the second that things don't start going right, they fire them, you get rid of them, and so there tends to be a lot of that situation. So someone that stays for 30 years, it's the same thing with Tom Wildenhouse, who is the director of golf here. I mean, it's almost like family. There's a love that's involved with this. Like, you were here since the day one. I refer to it as the birth of the golf course. You were there for the birth of this child. It really has become like your child, and I know you've heard that many times too.
Yeah, it has. It's interesting. I don't know if you're aware, but Coach Ditka is a founding member at Old Florida Golf Club. So one of the board of directors, one of my bosses, and I can remember clearly when he got let go of the Saints, kind of commiserating with him and using that same phrase as, our industries are a lot alike, Coach. They really are.
That's right.
That's
And you're like with the Pittsburgh Steelers, where there's not a whole lot of turnover. You're solid.
And speaking of challenges, I mean, we play in Broward County a lot, or Palm Beach County, and you have a bunch of different public golf courses, and then you have a whole, in Broward there's not many private courses,
not many.
And then in Palm Beach there's a lot more. But do you, I see things on courses where people don't fill in their divots, they don't fix
ball
their
marks,
ball marks,
don't rake the bunkers.
I presume that doesn't happen nearly as much at a course like this, or am I crazy?
I would hope so.
You would,
the members, you're an owner of this golf course,
Okay.
so we would hope that members take pride in their facility. We also have a year-round caddy program, so we do have a significant amount of caddies that go out, and that helps as well. And of course, my team will set it up every morning to be ready for the membership.
How are you feeling when you see someone who's maybe a guest, doing those obvious, golf etiquette 101, or what? How does that make you feel as the guy who's, in charge of making sure that everybody has a great experience at the golf course?
I'd like to say it gets easier the longer I've been here, but I'll be honest, it doesn't. And Tom and I talk a lot about this. Tom and I have a great partnership, being together over 30 years. And, he has just as much pride in the golf course as I do. And we both can't stop trying. We can't let up. So, for us this time of year in the winter, it's our peak winter golf season, and it's traffic. Mm-hmm. That's our biggest challenge. I mean, turf grass growth, of course, recovery, but that plays right into traffic. So those wear patterns. So I'll be honest, for me, the cringe moment is watching where people drive.
Okay.
And we've changed the culture here quite a bit, and it's gotten much better through the years.
And you spoke a little bit about the biggest challenge right now is traffic, but what about pests? What about the rain? And I know this course probably drains better than 99.9% of places that I've ever played, for sure. But what about, the fact that you're so close to the Everglades, which is swampland for those of us that don't live in Florida and don't know what that means? The Everglades is a swamp. So you've got the swamp next door, you've got rain, and I'm sure it rains every single day in the summer over here on the west coast of Florida, just like it does on the east coast of Florida. So how does all of that factor in?
Well, that's a lot. That'll be about a 30-minute discussion.
Okay,
break it down for us.
Give us the KISS the version of
you got
it if you can.
You got it. And that's how I try to communicate to the membership as well, and golfers in general, because golfers love golf, not necessarily turf. Right. Golfers love golf, so you got to keep it simple. It's interesting you're here today, because today is the start of the winter solstice. Okay. So it's the shortest day of the year. So at 10:27 p.m. tonight, the winter solstice arrives. What that means is the sun is in the furthest part of the sky in the south, so we have less sun. So even though it's our busiest winter, our busiest golf season is right now in the winter, we have the least amount of sunlight hours. And grass, really keeping simple, grass needs four things. It needs sunlight, It needs water, it needs nutrients and oxygen, and it needs it in the correct amount. You can have all you want of 3. If you don't have 1, grass doesn't live. So
Okay.
this is a particularly challenging year, being a strong El Nino weather pattern. So it's cooler and wetter than normal, and it's cloudier. So with those wetter periods means clouds, so less sun. So traffic management and water management are really the keys to success in the wintertime. In the summertime, right, drainage. That's another Dr. Dewich thing. The keys to growing grass: number 1, drainage; number 2, drainage; number 3, drainage. So yeah, we've actually installed over 25 miles of drain tile since I've been here, since the golf course was constructed. So not only do we have good surface drainage, we have subsurface drainage that just continually gets added to every single year. And you're right, of course, pest, mole cricket being the number 1 pest in Florida, challenging pest. But
We'll have to ask our producer, Curfton, about that. He's an entomologist, so you guys can geek out on about that off camera later.
Yeah, he knows all about those. He knows all about those guys.
Sean and I would be looking at you with blank stares, like I have no idea. I don't know what kind of cricket that is. I don't know.
Chinch bugs.
Chinch bugs.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
gotcha.
Manganese.
There you go. There you go. So,
a lot of people don't even know what that stuff means.
That sounds like an old movie.
Exactly. We talked about that.
Were you passionate about grass and agriculture first, or were you passionate about golf first, or was it one and the same for you?
Well, that's an interesting story, because growing up, I mean, I was passionate about basketball.
All right.
I was the captain of my high school basketball team. If you could pick a major in high school, it would have been basketball.
Okay.
So, after I finished high school, I didn't know what I wanted to do. I thought I wanted to be a wildlife photographer, a state park manager. I loved the outdoors. I enjoyed golf. I played a little bit of golf growing up. But really was just stumbled and it was spiraling, not Johnny Manziel spiraling, but spiraling out of control, not knowing what I wanted to do in life. So feel very blessed to have found the industry. I was last day of campus at FSU. I was trying to be a civil engineer. Thought building things outdoors, that's why I enjoy that. I want to make a good living, but ran into an old friend that says, you ought to go get a job at the golf course, the newest golf course in town, Golden Eagle. I thought, what the heck? So, I was spiraling. So I cut my shoulder length hair off and took out the earring. And
we're similar in that aspect. We got to compare pictures.
Yeah. So that I went out and then golf course superintendent Jeff Vietmeyer took a chance on this young 20-something-year-old kid and hired me. And from that day on, I fell in love with the industry. Just watching the sunrise in the morning and listening to the birds chirp and the smell of fresh cut grass.
Yeah.
I mean, it just doesn't get any better.
Yeah.
The challenges, it means nothing when you can do that in the morning.
And then being a former basketball athlete, how was your transition to playing golf? Because obviously you're playing golf, right? I mean, you're not squandering this opportunity to play this beautiful course that you help keep, maintain, build, and we're there from day one like it's your baby. You're playing golf.
I love the game of golf. I'm currently a 20 index.
Okay.
I desire to be about a 12, but I doubt I ever will be because I just don't play enough. And as you know, golf takes practice. And as a golf course superintendent, when you're here 8 to 10 hours a day, some days you really don't want to be out there playing. But I've been blessed to travel all over the world and play golf. And it's such a great game, as you two know, and to interact with people and the exercise and being out in nature. And I absolutely love it. And for me, it's tempo and stay in my posture. I don't know why that's so hard, but it just...
But you're a tall guy,
yeah,
right? And in other sports, we use explosive power,
right?
And not so much in the game of golf. The explosive part comes not at the initial movement,
right,
but on the way through. So that's as all of us being former athletes of some sort, that's the biggest challenge in golf. Yeah,
it's so hard to swing slow though.
Yeah. Right. You need lessons with Sean Kicker.
Yes.
And practice. That's what my key is, and I'm improving, slowly but surely. And I should probably be practicing 5 times as much as I am. So, but part of the reason that we started this podcast is because I didn't start playing golf till I was in my mid-30s.
Okay.
So about 5.5, 6 years ago, and I wish that somebody had forced me almost to put a golf club in my hand earlier, because I've grown my business. We started this podcast because of the impact that golf has had on my business and my networking. And I'm sure that, as a guy who's traveled the world, you've met a lot of interesting people. I mean, you already mentioned Coach Ditka, who's a legend. We actually got to meet Bob Beeman through this podcast, who's a legend, and have him on the show. So can you give us a couple stories? Because our audience loves stories.
Oh, boy. Well, I can tell you that you mentioned Coach Ditka. So I can remember the first time I met Coach Ditka. They hired me, of course, but on the golf course, it was opening day. And the founding members were all having a meeting inside and getting ready to go out to play. So I go out to get a call on the radio right before this, and my staff saying, "Hey, Darren, we got a rattlesnake behind number 1 tee." And I'm like, "Okay, it's opening day. We can't have that." So I run back to my office, and I had a shotgun in the office. I kept the shells in the vehicle, so I kept them separate, but went and got some shells for the shotgun. And this was a native piece of property when we built it. So like you said, the Everglades.
The road wasn't even completed yet.
A forest. So came out, got the shotgun, come running up or driving up, get out, shoot the rattlesnake, get ready to pick it up. And all I hear is, "Hey, son, what are you shooting?" And I turn around, and it's Coach Ditka. And I said, "Well, Coach, it's a rattlesnake." And I didn't know at the time, but he's terrified of snakes. His wife later on, Mrs. Ditka, told me that the story, and there's actually an article about it, that he's terrified of snakes. So that's quite the story you wanted to hear.
No,
but,
I love it.
Yeah, brilliant. That's great.
I would hear 10 more of those. So absolutely, that's a really cool one. So you, as part of your job, you had to go shoot a rattlesnake with a shotgun, is what you're telling me.
We don't like to. I mean, we would love to coexist with wildlife at Old Florida and any golf course superintendent, but it does happen. But we definitely coexist. We have a huge deer population, bald eagles fly in and out. There's osprey. I mean, just any amount of wildlife you can imagine. Another quick story, many years ago, but there's a gator in every lake, and is what I like to say, and there really is. So one day, my boss is playing with his buddies. His ball is next to the lake bank on hole 15, and he's got his back to the water, and his buddies are like, Tom, look. And Mr. Cook's like, whatever. And they said, "Tom, look," and there's a gator just cruising along the water, heading right towards him. And so Mr. Cook backs off, because there really is not an issue. They're non-confrontational. It's not going to be a problem. But Mr. Cook backs off, and the gator comes up and eats the golf ball and goes right back in the water. And his buddies just laugh, and they said, "You got to play it as it lies.
Get your scuba gear out."
But we had to relocate that gator. We don't like to do that. We've only relocated a half dozen in the years. But when they get used to people and they think of that as food, that's when it becomes a problem. So he got moved out. But you'll see quite a few today as you go out.
Okay.
Very cool. So we had a conversation earlier about you spent some time at Augusta National over there, and tell us a little bit about your time and your experience there. I learned an awful lot about being able to get to the consistency and speed of greens, that some greens required different strategies.
Yes. So Augusta National was just a wonderful experience. Some of my fondest memories in golf were there. Some of my dearest friendships were formed there. It's a topic, as you well know, that when people know you work there, they want to talk about it. For many years, though, it was just understood. You don't talk a lot about what goes on inside those gates, because it's a very private facility. But there are certainly stories I can tell. And I worked there for 6 months when I was going to school at Penn State. I was an apprentice superintendent, and I actually came back after graduation as well. But to your question, one of my greens runs, mowing greens, included green number 14.
Right.
And at that point, Augusta National had a variety of subsurface greens. So you had USGA greens and you had native greens. And 14 was a native soil green, which meant it grew just a little bit more. It released the nutrients a little bit more than a USGA green. So you start the morning with, you cut the green 1, 2, or 3 times. So that one was always a double cut. So during Masters Week, got my double cut in, and I'm waiting on Dr. Dewich and Dr. Brown, who were the step meter team. They check every green multiple times a day to make sure it's consistent.
Right.
That's the key of that step meter, is for consistency. So one year in particular, it was a little bit warmer weather, and 14 was growing a little bit more. So They came around, they did the speed, and they're like, "No, Darren, one more time." So I
Yeah.
did a third cut. And if
Third
you've
cut.
been to Augusta, you know those
Many times.
mounds
The
in
mounds
14.
and 14 is
Yeah, my calves were burning. And
oh, I'm sure.
I finished the third cut, and then by this point, the patrons are coming in. They're all surrounding you with the rope around the ropes and looking. And Dr. Dewich finally came around. Everyone else is done. The greens are done, and he does a stent meter, and he said, "One more time."
Yeah.
So
Fourth time.
I
Wow.
had to do the fourth time. And at this point, there's no dew, so it's hard to see where you're mowing.
Yeah. You got to
So
really pay attention.
and I've got 1,000 people around me watching this.
Yeah, because by now the sun's up.
2-year-old
and
kid mowing a green, and you can imagine the nerves and
Sure.
trying to keep a straight line. And fortunately, the fourth cut was a charm.
All right.
that time.
And now we all know why Augusta National looks like they cut the greens with toenail scissors, because they really do, basically. That's
Yeah, I mean,
crazy.
it's just the science that goes behind it and the dedication to that level of quality. I mean, Drew, we play a lot of golf at public golf courses, and we'll talk about how one green is a little slower than the other, or we start getting into talking about the G word, which we don't use here at Old Florida Club. The G word being grain, very grainy. You have a different term for it. Share a little bit about what your perspective is on it.
Well, I sat next to a Johnny Miller on a plane one time, and we had a short conversation. But we call grain is inherent with any warm season grass. It's going to tend to want to grow towards the sun. Any plant, it's what a plant does. We do our best to manage what we call leaf orientation. So it does have a natural orientation to lean towards the sun. So we do a lot of vertical grooming. We switch directions on the cut every day. We use brooms, and the heights of cut you're cutting greens at today. I mean, we'll say grain, but the grain is almost non-existent. I mean, when you're cutting below 1/10 of an inch, it's really hard to have much grain that impacts the ball. And I love hearing members say, "Well, Darren, the greens just don't break like I think they should," and that they're trying to play too much grain into them. So as you play today, just think about just a little less break than maybe you think.
Almost take the grain out of it.
Yeah.
Well, we got Sean coming out there with us, so he'll help us.
But you call it leaf orientation?
Leaf orientation.
Leaf orientation. Okay. And so talk to us a little bit about the evolution of these different types of grasses. I mean, this is a different grass, I assume, than one that was installed 30 years ago. And you've been through how many renovations since in 30 years?
So we were constructed in 1992.
Okay.
In 2000, we did a renovation, which is essentially just a regrassing. And then we did another renovation 21 years later in the summer of 2021. The regrassing in 2000, we switched the greens grass from Tiff Dwarf to Tiff Eagle. So Tiff Dwarf was released back in the 50s.
Okay.
But in 1992, it was still the standard. That's what people were using in the South. But right about that time in the early 90s, a lot of grasses were under testing, and I was testing a grass here in 1995. It was called TW72. Well, TW72, 4 years later in 1999, was released as Tiff Eagle.
Okay.
So what we have on the greens today is Tiff Eagle, and I had been growing it for 4 years under an experimental name. So in 2000, having 4 years of experience under my belt, it was a no-brainer.
Interesting.
So we regrassed the greens to Tiff Eagle. And in 2021, there really had not been any grasses that had arisen as being better than Tiff Eagle. Today, I would say there is. So if we have time, we'll look at our experimental plots. And I have a grass that today is named Tiff 3D.
Okay.
So anything with a Tiff on it is from Tifton, Georgia.
Sure. Yep.
Tiff Eagle,
I've
Tiff
been
Way,
there.
Tiff Grand. Yeah. Wonderful turf grass breeding program. I started with Dr. Burton back in the 50s. Dr. Hanna took over, and now we have Dr. Schwartz. So this is Dr. Schwartz's first grass that we're growing, now called Tiff 3D. When we planted it, it was called TG 101.
Okay.
So it's been fun to watch the evolution of grasses, and I love trying and experimenting and expanding my network with individuals. So Tiff 3D, if they ask me the same question today, I'd have to say, yes, there is a better grass, and it would be Tiff 3D. Yeah.
And what is the major differences that you're seeing? Why is one better for the listeners? Why is one grass any better than the other?
So a lot of grasses that are released today in particular greens grass, I'd have to say speed.
Okay.
Certainly, most golfers like quick greens. So the grasses being bred today are more dwarf, more upright growth habit, less leaf orientation. So that's one thing about the 3D is it is more upright growth habit. It does have a darker green color. Not that color matters, because to me it really doesn't. It's also got better recuperability. So if you have any kind of stress, we talked about insects earlier, stress from insects, disease, sunlight, lack of sunlight.
Yeah. Too much water.
It's more environmentally friendly,
Okay.
as well as providing better green speed. And same thing with the fairway grasses and rough grasses, more environmentally friendly, less inputs, better stress tolerance, better low sunlight tolerance. So all things that provide a better playing surface for the member and golfers.
And so they're genetically in doing this stuff, right? I mean,
Yes.
they're working with genetics when it comes to.
Yeah, so some is genetics, some is just actual selections. So TIF 3D is what we call a selection. Over 13 years ago, it was a patch on a golf course in South Carolina that just looked great. A little small circle. Rest green was okay, but this stood out. So Dr. Schwartz, Dr. Hanna, and the USGA agronomists, they selected that grass, hence the word selection, and then grew it out and have experimented with it in trials for 13, 14 years. That much time goes into a variety that comes out of Tifton, Georgia, before it's released. So that was a selection. Tiff Eagle was more of a processed grass. So it was actually Tiffway 2. If you've heard that, Loxahatchee used to have Tiffway 2.
Right. Yep.
They took Tiffway 2 and Dr. Hanna gamma radiation, kind of like the Hulk,
That's incredible.
gamma radiation on this plant. And then grew it out for, again, 10 to 15 years. Anything out of Tifton is going to take that long because they want to make sure it's right. And that's how Tiff Eagle. So sometimes it is selection and sometimes it's processed.
That is incredible. That what a great story that
I'm
is.
just blown away.
Yeah,
by the
people don't
knowledge.
realize.
I mean, it's,
Yeah.
as a weekend golfer, or a golfer for business purposes, I like to refer to myself. This is not something we think about, right? We'll go. And, we're playing a lot less public courses now since we started this podcast, of course. But when we were playing more public courses, we'll go and it's like, eventually hanging out with guys like Sean, you become a bit of a golf snob, right? Because you can't go back to the course. And I think of the Seinfeld episode where Kramer's talking about
Can't go back to play with public
can't
courses.
go back to those public golf
do
courses. I won't do it. They got big brown patches, and you take it for granted as you
Yeah.
get to play nicer golf courses as your network expands, and you're doing business. Right now our main sponsor is Winners Award Group, who does business with 800 private golf courses all over the country. So it's opening a lot of doors to play different golf courses that are, they'll have maybe not someone on your level, but someone up there that knows all this stuff and can keep the course looking pristine at all times.
Well, I know Darren's heavily involved with the Golf Course Superintendents Association, and he probably does know a lot of this golf course superintendents at the golf courses that you guys have contracts with. But tell a little bit about your involvement with them. And I know there's a big anniversary coming up, and just some of the things that you've done with the golf course superintendents.
Well, it was an honor and a privilege to be able to give back to my peers. I was the 82nd president of the Golf Course Superintendents Association of America, an association of over 20,000 members. So when I first got involved in just doing committee work, it was truly just to give back. I feel so blessed to have found this wonderful industry that we get to call work, that I just wanted to give back. And serving as president was never a goal of mine. It just kind of evolved. So in 2018 and 19, I did serve as president of GCSAA.
Congrats.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's a big deal.
Honor and a privilege. Yeah. Today I continue to serve. I'm the Centennial Committee Chair for GCSAA. We celebrate our 100th anniversary on September 13th, 2026. So we have an incredible committee in place that are planning that event. And it's truly an honor. And GCSA's mission statement is really simple. It's to serve our members, advance the profession, and enhance the enjoyment, growth, and vitality of the game. So we believe that we're essential to golf success. And so being a part of that and those friendships that have evolved has been a true honor. And As Tom likes to say, the personal and professional growth that he's seen in me by serving is just so evident, and I love that because it's extremely true, and it's been valuable for me to be able to serve.
Yeah, I found with my involvement with PGA and being on the board is you're surrounded by the best of the best, and that elevates you and your experience
Absolutely.
and your skill set. So yeah, very cool.
Wow, this has been just an absolute education for me. So I really appreciate you taking all this time with us today and inviting us up here from the hour and 24 minutes, short little drive across the alley. So thank you so much, Darren. We appreciate you. We're looking forward to enjoying your course and spending some more time with you. So thank you very,
Yeah, I
very
think
much.
I think Darren's gonna show us some of the test areas that he's got, and perhaps some of the stuff on the golf course.
Yeah,
So we'll
we'll
do
have
some more on time.
a lot of really great content
Yeah,
for YouTube for our viewers and our listeners. So thank you very much
You're,
for taking the time today.
you're very welcome. Thank you for having me. Keep up the good work, what you do for golf.